Elara Miles was 22 and lived with her mother in a quiet suburban town far from the noise of the city. She was a senior majoring in communications, always chasing new ideas, new trends, and new ways to stand out. Her personality was bright but restless. She liked attention, spoke before thinking, and often compared her life with people who seemed more successful or glamorous. Her mother, Ruth Miles, was 48 and worked as a janitor at a local elementary school. Ruth's days were long and tiring, filled with sweeping hallways, cleaning desks, and lifting heavy buckets. She never complained, yet exhaustion was always present in her eyes. Their home was old and small, but Ruth cared for it with quiet pride. Since childhood, Elara had felt embarrassed by her mother's simple life and plain clothes. She never said it aloud, but the distance grew each year. Their home looked peaceful, but inside, an unspoken tension waited for its moment to surface. Ruth woke up at 4 every morning, long before the sun rose. She moved quietly in the small kitchen, preparing eggs or simple porridge for breakfast. The house felt calm during those early hours, filled only with soft cooking sounds. Elara always woke up late, rushing through her mornings without much care. She often frowned at the breakfast on the table, calling it too plain or too boring. Ruth never complained about her reaction. She only smiled and said, "Eat a little, dear." Every evening, Ruth waited for Elara to return home, even when Elara came back very late. Sometimes the food turned cold, but Ruth still kept it ready in warm containers. She believed sharing dinner kept a family close, even when the bond felt weak. Ruth never raised her voice, not even when Elara spoke sharply or walked away mid-conversation. She simply folded the laundry, washed the dishes, and kept the house peaceful. Her love was quiet, steady, and without conditions. Few people knew how hard Ruth worked at the elementary school. She cleaned classrooms, wiped windows, carried heavy bags of trash, and swept long hallways. She saved every small amount she could, putting aside coins and crumpled bills. All of it was for Elara's university fees, though she never mentioned the sacrifices. Still, Elara felt embarrassed by her mother's simple clothes and worn shoes. She compared Ruth with the elegant, confident mothers of her classmates. Some wore expensive perfume, stylish dresses, or talked about business trips. Standing next to them, Ruth looked too ordinary in Elara's eyes. Yet the home remained peaceful, almost fragile, like a calm lake before a sudden storm. The quiet routine continued day after day, hiding the growing distance between mother and daughter. No one outside the house noticed the tension, but it filled every room like unspoken air. This part of their life seemed steady and safe, but something was already changing underneath. The peace would not last forever, and soon their world would no longer look the same. The turning point came on a cold Thursday morning, but the tension had started days before. Everything began when Elara's friends saw her mother at the college gate. Ruth had come only to bring Elara a lunchbox she had forgotten. She walked slowly, still wearing her work uniform, with dust on her sleeves and tired lines around her eyes. Elara's friends whispered, and then laughed. One girl joked about Ruth's old shoes. Another boy imitated the way she walked. Their voices were not loud, but loud enough for Elara to hear. The shame hit her like a sudden wave. Instead of defending her mother, she turned her face away and pretended she did not know her. Ruth, gentle as always, smiled and waved at Elara. But Elara only muttered a quick "not now," and hurried off. Her friends raised their eyebrows, and the moment burned inside her. When she returned home that afternoon, her frustration exploded. She accused her mother of embarrassing her. She shouted about the uniform, the shoes, and even the lunchbox that Ruth had lovingly prepared. Ruth said nothing. She simply lowered her eyes and apologized, though she had done nothing wrong. Over the next few days, the house grew heavier. Elara complained about the food being too plain. She criticized the old curtains. She disliked the new sweater her mother bought for her, claiming it looked cheap. Ruth stayed calm, always responding with soft "it's okay," or "I will fix it." One night, while scrolling on her phone, Elara heard a sound from the other room. quiet sobs, like someone trying very hard not to cry. She paused for a moment but did nothing. She told herself her mother was being too sensitive, and went back to texting her friends. Then came the winter morning that changed everything. The air was sharp enough to sting the skin. Ruth had stayed up late washing uniforms and preparing meals. She woke even earlier than usual. When Elara saw her mother's uniform still wrinkled, she snapped instantly. "Why can't you do one simple thing right?" she shouted. Ruth didn't respond. She didn't even look up. Her hands rested on her lap, still and pale. Something felt wrong. When Elara stepped closer, her breath caught. Ruth was leaning to one side, eyes closed, face drained of color. Her fingers were icy cold. Elara shook her shoulder. "Mom? Mom?" But Ruth didn't move. Panic hit Elara with full force. The reality sank in. Her mother had fainted from exhaustion, from years of overwork and skipped meals, from carrying everything alone while still trying to give her daughter the best life possible. For the first time, fear replaced anger. And guilt, raw, sharp, undeniable, rose inside her. At that moment, Elara realized how much she had taken for granted, and how easily she could lose the person who loved her more than anyone else in the world. The hospital room was quiet, almost too quiet for Elara to breathe. She sat beside the bed and looked at her mother's pale face, a face she knew all her life but never really saw until now. Ruth's hands were rough and dry, covered with tiny cuts from cleaning chemicals. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if each breath required effort. A doctor entered with a clipboard. He spoke calmly, but every sentence felt like a blow to Elara. He explained that Ruth was severely exhausted, dehydrated, and lacking proper nutrition. He said she had been sleeping only a few hours each night. The school had been short-staffed, so Ruth took extra shifts, early mornings, late evenings, weekends. She pushed herself too hard, the doctor said gently. Her body simply could not keep going. Elara felt her stomach twist. A wave of guilt swept over her so strong she nearly lost her breath. While she complained about simple meals and plain clothes, her mother had been breaking herself apart to keep everything together. Hours passed before Ruth finally opened her eyes. She blinked slowly, confused by the white lights above her. When she noticed Elara sitting there, her first reaction was worry, not for herself, but for her daughter. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry for making you worry," she murmured. Those words shattered Elara. She grabbed her mother's hand and broke down, tears spilling faster than she could wipe them away. "Mom, no. I'm the one who should apologize," she cried. But the words felt too small, too late, too fragile to carry the weight of what she had done. In that moment, Elara remembered every time she rolled her eyes at her mother, every cruel comment, every sigh of disappointment she threw at the woman who never asked for anything in return. She remembered how Ruth waited for her at night with warm food, even when she came home late and annoyed. She remembered how her mother saved every spare coin for her education. She remembered how Ruth smiled even when she was clearly tired, trying to hide her fatigue so Elara wouldn't worry. Elara felt something collapse inside her, a rotten foundation built from years of selfishness and shame. She realized the truth she had ignored for too long. Her mother wasn't weak. Her mother was strong in ways Elara had never understood. The breaking point was not just Ruth collapsing on the chair. It was Elara's heart finally cracking open, forcing her to confront the person she had become. For the first time in her life, she was terrified, not of losing comfort, not of losing friends, but of losing the only person who loved her without conditions. This was the moment everything inside her shifted. And nothing would be the same again. The house felt unfamiliar when Elara returned alone that evening. It was the same old place she had lived in for years, yet the silence inside now carried a sharp, aching weight. Without her mother's soft footsteps or gentle humming, every corner seemed colder. She walked into the kitchen and noticed how spotless the countertop was. It had always been that way, but she had never once thought about why. Her mother had cleaned it every night after finishing a long shift. Quietly, without complaint, without expecting recognition. On the table sat a simple meal her mother had prepared before fainting that morning. Rice, vegetables, a small bowl of soup. Elara touched the food, now cold, and felt her chest tighten. These simple dishes she used to mock suddenly felt like treasures, warm reminders of love expressed through care, not luxury. She wandered into her mother's room and opened the drawer, the one Ruth always kept closed. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, bills, tuition fees, receipts from the university, all addressed to Elara, many marked paid. Her throat tightened. Her mother had been carrying the weight of their life alone, while she, blinded by pride and insecurity, kept demanding more. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Elara finally allowed herself to cry. Not the frustrated tears she shed when things didn't go her way, but a deep, shaking grief. Grief for her mother's pain. Grief for her own selfishness. And grief for all the moments she had pushed her mother away, believing she deserved better. In the quiet house, her heart began to shift. Respect grew where irritation once lived. Gratitude bloomed where embarrassment had taken root. And guilt, heavy but honest, opened a doorway to something new. The desire to change. This was the beginning of her healing, fragile but real. When Ruth finally returned home, Elara greeted her with a quiet but sincere smile. She helped her mother walk inside, holding her arm gently as if she were holding something fragile and precious. For the first time in many years, their home felt different, not because of the walls or the furniture, but because of the shift inside Elara. She began taking care of her mother with a devotion she had never shown before. Every morning, she woke earlier than usual to prepare a simple breakfast: porridge, toast, warm tea, foods Ruth liked but rarely made for herself. Elara cleaned the house carefully, wiping every corner her mother used to tidy alone. She washed Ruth's uniforms, folded her clothes, and made sure her mother rested as much as she needed. To ease the financial burden, Elara applied for a part-time job at a local cafe. She struggled during the first week. Long hours, tired legs, rude customers. But it was the first time she understood the exhaustion her mother lived with every day. Each paycheck, though small, made her strangely proud. She saved half of it for the household and used the rest for groceries or medicine Ruth needed. In the evenings, Elara sat beside her mother on the couch. Sometimes they talked about small things: the weather, school, the people Ruth met at work. Other times, they talked about deeper memories: Elara's childhood, the hardships her mother faced, and the dreams she once had but set aside so her daughter could study. These conversations were awkward at first, like two people learning to speak again after years of silence. But day by day, their words flowed more naturally, opening spaces that had long been closed. Elara also began to reflect on her past behavior. She realized how often she had dismissed her mother's efforts, how easily she had judged Ruth based on appearances, and how cruel she had been without meaning to. This understanding did not come all at once. It arrived slowly, in quiet moments while she cleaned, cooked, or lay awake at night. Guilt stayed with her, but so did determination. She wanted to do better. She wanted to become someone her mother could rely on, not someone who caused her pain. And as she changed, something softened inside Ruth as well. The tiredness in her eyes remained, but there was a new warmth whenever she looked at her daughter. Their home, once tense and filled with unspoken distance, now felt safer, lighter. By the end of winter, Elara was no longer the impulsive, self-centered girl she had been. She had grown, not through lectures or punishments but through responsibility, empathy, and the realization of her mother's quiet sacrifices. This was the true beginning of her healing, learning to love with intention, and learning to see her mother not as an embarrassment but as the strongest person she had ever known. 1 year later, Elara walked onto her graduation stage with steady steps and new eyes. She no longer wanted attention for herself alone. She wanted to honor the person who gave her everything. So she created a short graduation video called My Silent Hero. It showed simple scenes of her mother's life: early mornings, tired hands, quiet smiles, and long nights of work. When the video was played at the ceremony, many students and teachers grew emotional. They saw not just Ruth, but the image of many parents who sacrificed in silence. Elara stood on stage and said, "I used to feel ashamed of the wrong things. I now understand true beauty is love that never asks for praise." Ruth watched the video from the audience with trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face, not from sadness, but from a joy she had waited years to feel. For the first time, she saw her daughter speak about her with pride, not embarrassment. When the ceremony ended, Elara ran to her mother and held her tightly. There were no fancy words, only a quiet promise. "I will never take you for granted again." They walked home together, laughing softly, the distance between them completely gone. The story closes with a warm truth. Even the deepest hurt can heal when love is met with understanding and change. And sometimes, the person we ignore the most is the one who loves us the strongest. A mother's love is silent, steady, and powerful. Regret cannot rewrite the past, but it can build a better future. And the people we overlook are often the ones who would give us everything. What about you? Have you ever realized someone's silent love too late? Share your thoughts and subscribe for more English listening stories.